one of my primary responsibilities was looking after the teens. And had a great group of teens in this particular church, and we had a lot of fun together. And we had been given the opportunity to take a church service in the big church. And so this was very exciting. And so all the kids had been practicing and working on their things. And I had a 17-year-old boy that I'd been working with, helping him to put the sermon together. And it was the first time that he'd ever done anything like this. He was just a high school kid, and I helped him, and he was doing well, and he had a good message, and he was saying all the right things, and I was so proud of him. And the day came, and he was nervous, because it was a big church. There were lots of people in the auditorium. But, you know, he was stoked, he was pumped, and he'd even dressed up for the occasion, you know. Normally, he was the kid that would come to church in jeans and a T-shirt. Because he was going up the front, he was wearing a suit, you know, and he looked sharp. So he had his shirt on and his suit jacket, and I was so proud of him. And he gets up the front, and it's summer, and it's a hot day, right? So he's up there, and he's preaching his heart out, and he's, you know, it's not the world's most polished sermon, but he's 17 and he's doing a really good job, and I'm so proud of him. But as he's getting animated and he's warming up to his message, he gets hot. And so he takes his jacket off. And then he walks over and he puts it on the chair, and then he carries on. And he's going and he's preaching, and he gets down. I think he does a great job. But after the sermon, the pastor was approached by a church member who was very concerned that he'd taken his jacket off while he was preaching. And he didn't even have a tie on. I mean, well, exactly. This is the correct reaction. Like, how can he not take this seriously? Like, this was just disappointing. And how can we let this happen in our church? A person up there preaching with no tie, button undone, just a shirt. You know, what happened to standards? Now, hang on a second. I know that we are not a very traditional church, right? So we hear this story and we laugh, right? Except I just want you to stop and think about this lady's perspective for a second. What was the core value that underlined her concern? Respect, correct, okay? She cared a lot about respect for God, about respect for the pulpit, about respect for church. Now, is that a good value? Yes, okay. So this is an interesting example of the fact that good values, which are important and good, can sometimes not always maybe be the best value in any given situation. Here's another example. More recently, there was not this church again. There was a grandmother sitting in church reading her Bible on her phone. And her son came up to her and said, "Mum, put your phone away in church. I'm trying to teach my children that church is not a time for screens. And when they see you playing on your phone in church, it doesn't help." Now, there's maybe a bit more nuance here, but can you see both perspectives? Can you see the core values that underline both of those people's views? One, the grandmother was just happy to be sitting in church reading her Bible. Her son, who's trying to set a good example to his children, and he's trying to imbue in his kids the values that he wants them to have, and then he sees his own mother doing what he perceives as setting a bad example for his children. This is another example of a clash of values. The values on both sides are not wrong, but they clash because maybe they're not quite aligned. Now, in this situation, in both situations, everyone in this room has a view of who is right, okay? Was it fine for that kid to take his jacket off, or do you side with the woman that says, "How dare he take his jacket off in church"? Are you on the side of the grandmother who's happy to read her Bible on her phone, or do you think that's setting a bad example to the grandkids and she should be supporting her son in the choices that that parenting family are making? All of you are making your decision on which side of the fence you choose based on your own core values, based on what your own priorities are about what is important in life. And it's really important for us to understand our core values, because our core values make up our why. They are why we do the things that we do. They are why we behave the way we behave. Now, today is the first in a new series here at Burwood, where we're going to do 3 weeks on values. We're going to look at what kind of values we as a church want to have. What kind of people do we want to be? And I came across a song recently that, on the one hand, initially I heard it and I kind of thought, this is a bit cheesy, all right? But then I listened to it a couple more times and it started inspiring me because it speaks to an idea of what kind of church I want to be a part of. I've put the slides in the wrong order. Can we just go to the song? Thank you.
There was a time that I swore I would never go back. I was blind to the truth, didn't know what I had. I was running, I was searching, but every place I turned for healing left me more broken than the last. Take me back to the place that feels like home, to the people I can depend on, to the faith that's in my bones. Take me back to a preacher and a verse where they've seen me at my worst, to the love I had at first. Oh, I wanna go to church. Trying to walk on my own, but I'm wound up lost. Now I'm making my way to the foot of the cross. It's not a trophy for the winners, it's a shelter for the sinners, and it's right where I belong. Take me back to the place that feels like home, to the people I can depend on, to the faith that's in my bones. Take me back to a preacher and a verse where they've seen me at my worst, to the love I had at first. Oh, I wanna go to church. I wanna go to church. Oh, more than an obligation, it's our foundation, the family of God. I know it's hard, but we need each other. We're sisters and brothers. Oh, take me back to the place that feels like home, to the people I can depend on, to the faith that's in my bones. Take me back to a preacher and a verse where they've seen me at my worst, to the love I had at first. Oh, I wanna go to church. Yeah, I wanna go to church. Oh, I wanna go, wanna go, wanna go. Oh, I wanna go to church. Oh, I wanna go to church.
I want to go to a church like that. I want to go to a church, and I've left my flicker. That's the other reason why I'm messing up my slides. I want to go to a church where people have seen me at my worst and still love me. I want to go to a church where I'm accepted no matter how I've failed, what I've done, what mess is on in my life. Here's some of the words here. Take me back to the place that feels like home, to the people I can depend on, to the faith that's in my bones. Take me back to a preacher and a verse where they've seen me at my worst, to the love I had at first. I want to go to church. I don't know what your experience with church is. I imagine some of you feel this way about church, but I imagine some of you have not had this experience with church. I imagine some of you have felt like you can't go to church because maybe you felt judged, or maybe you felt condemned, maybe you felt criticized, maybe you felt that you can't be accepted for who you are. Maybe you felt shame because people at church have found out some secret about you that you had been trying to keep quiet, and now you have to go and look at those people in the face after you've been pretending to be a good person your whole life, and now they know that you're not. Churches like this are not accidental. They are intentional. We all have hills to die on, lines we won't cross, standards we won't walk past. And having values like this, having a commitment to being the kind of place that accepts, the kind of place that loves, the kind of place that is going to make a difference in people's lives, they are intentional. You know, I came across a quotation when I was a kid, and it was my favorite quotation, except even when I was small, I struggled with the gendered language. And I know gendered language is a big thing now, but even when I was small, it irritated me, this quote, because it only talks about men. But it was written 150 years ago, so we'll try and forgive that. But this quote is my favorite quotation in the whole world from an author called Ellen White. And she here nails the kind of person that I'm going to be. And I put it on the screen as she quotes it, but I'm going to read it saying people instead of men, just because I'm stubborn like that. The greatest want of the world is the want of people. People who will not be bought or sold. People who in their inmost souls are true and honest. People who do not fear to call sin by its right name. People whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole. People who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. Came across that text and I had it on my bedroom wall when I was in primary school, because there was something about that language that stirred me. I wanted to be that kind of person. I wanted to be a person that, you know, I could be proud of, that I could stand up and make things right and make a difference in the world. And most people, if you've heard that quotation before, that's all you know, because that's the famous bit. That's the bit that gets put on your coffee mugs or your coasters or whatever. But actually, the very next sentence goes on and it says, "But such a character is not the result of accident. It is not due to special favors or endowments of providence. A noble character is the result of self-discipline, of the subjection of the lower to the higher nature, the surrender of self for the service of love to God and man." That's a shame. We've got to do something for it. We actually have to work. Now, sometimes when you talk about values and you talk about wanting to be this person, some people might say, oh, look, this is just another form of legalism. You're just giving us a whole list of things now that we have to do. But values is not legalism. It's not things that you have to do. Your values are who you are. Everybody has values, whether you like it or not, right? You all have values because they are what defines your why. They are what defines why you do the things you do, why you react the way that you react. Now, you can either choose to be a victim of the values that society and culture puts on you, or you can be intentional. You can say, this is the kind of person that I choose to be. And you can say, I'm going to hold myself to this value, and I'm going to set myself up to live to this standard, and I'm going to hold myself accountable to this value. And yes, it's work. For those of you who are parents, nobody goes into parenting saying, yes, I desperately want to change a baby's nappy. Or maybe some weird people do, but most normal people don't, right? And yet, as a parent, you don't go, oh, this is legalism, I'm having to change my baby's nappy again, forcing myself to prove my love to this child. You do it because your core values change, because your love for this child means that you want to look after this child, that you want to care for this child, that you want to give your child the best of everything that you can give them. And so this is the same with the values that we can choose to adopt when we think about our own personal lives and when we think about our collective lives as a church. Everyone has values. You're either a victim of your values, or you can choose them and be intentional. Your values say, who are you? What is your character? A few years ago, when I started learning about values and learning more about sort of how important they are, I was going for a job interview at the time. And this particular company that I was going for a job interview with, they made a really big deal about the fact that values were important to them. Okay, it was all over their website. You know, here's our core values. This is what we stand for. And I was curious because you've probably come across companies that say they have values. And so in the interview process, it was quite a senior role, so I had lots of interviews before I got the job. And I asked every single person on the way up, your values, are they words on the wall or are they lived? And with this particular, and I've been in job interviews where I've asked that question and I've had people laugh and go, oh yeah, they're on the reception wall. I couldn't tell you what they are, but you know, someone's thought about them. Yeah, sure, we've got that. They're on the website. That tells you a lot about the culture of the company if no one really knows what the values are. But this particular company, when I went for the interview, every single person said, absolutely, we live the values. This is what they are. And they listed them off. And they said, this is why I love this company. Because we say that we're this and we do this. And this is how we apply this. And we take this value. And, you know, I want to stay anonymous here, so I'm not going to mention the values because I don't want you to go and see which company I'm talking about. But they actually genuinely lived the values. And when I joined, everybody's wallpaper had the values on them. They were all over, all of it. So you were constantly reminded, these are the values. These are the things we stand for. These are the hills we die on. This is the line that we will not cross. And I remember taking the job. And early on, I was talking to a customer on the phone. And the customer said, you know what, you've signed me up to a 3-year contract. But now that I'm on the contract, I realize that I'm on the wrong plan for what I need. And you know, actually it's not what I need and it's this other plan that I need. And so I need to change it. And they're like, but we're stuck because, you know, once you've signed a contract, you guys don't let us swap. And I said, yeah, we will. And he goes, why? I said, because I know our core values. And I know that, sure, on paper, you've signed a contract. And on paper, we don't have to change your contract. But I know the values of this company. And if you're not on the right offering, we'll swap you. He's like, really? I'm like, yeah, really? And he's like, no, but really? I'm like, yeah, really? And he's like, but it's less money, the plan that I'm on. Like, you can't, like, I understand you letting me upgrade, but what company lets you downgrade so that you're paying less money when you've committed to a contract? I said, I know that we will do this because I know that we are true to our values. And we did. And he was shocked. He was like, I have never come across a telco who has let me downgrade in the middle of a contract before. And you know what? In that moment, I was so proud of us because I thought, you know what? We called out our values and we lived our values when the rubber hits the road. We didn't just say, these are our values and stuck them on a wall somewhere, but then computer says no when the contract runs through the system. It was super exciting to be part of that process. You know, Christians have a lot of values. And, you know, as we talked about in the beginning examples, a lot of them are all good, okay? So it's not like respect, for example, is a bad value. It's not like raising your children without screens is a bad value. These are good values, okay? But it's really important that we understand that they're not all equally important. It's important that you work out your priorities. But it doesn't mean that all of us should have the same values. Fundamentally, yes, there's an overarching Christianity-ness that we should all want to be like Jesus. But if your value is generosity and my value is service, that doesn't matter. Like, we are designed to live in unity and diversity and create a body of Christ when we come together in our differences and in our different strengths and in our different values. And so a variety of values is good. And that's why there's no sort of Bible text anywhere that says, thou shalt keep the following 3 values, because it's different for different people. However, there's lots of Bible texts that point to good values. Here's a very famous one, which everyone knows, Micah 6:8. You'll recognize it when you get there, if you haven't recognized it just from the verse. But I want to start from verse 6 because I want you to have the context of where this verse comes from. It says, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Is that a good thing? If you're living in the Old Testament world where burnt offerings is a thing, this is a great value to have. This is, yes, you would say, if you were reading this. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Now, that's not something that the Israelites ever believed in, but it was something that the local cultures believed in at the time. There were lots of people back then who believed that pacifying your God required child sacrifice. And so this was a view that existed back in ancient times. So he's asking the question. But here's the answer in verse 8. He has showed you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. He's not saying that your burnt offerings and your devotions and all of these things are bad. There's nothing wrong with, giving good gifts to God. But where is the core value here? The core value is those three things. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. When everything else boils away, this is what matters. Here's another example from Matthew 23, verse 23. And here, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were brilliant at their values, right? They knew every single law that existed, right? They understood exactly what God wanted of people, and they did a fantastic job of following the rules. But here, Jesus is scathing. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. See, what Jesus is saying here, there's nothing wrong with tithing your spices. Now, I'm not suggesting you guys go home and start measuring out from your spice racks, okay? But Jesus is saying there's nothing wrong with doing those things. There's nothing wrong with following the laws that God has provided, okay? But don't miss the point. Don't tithe your cumin and your mint and your dill to the extent of hurting, damaging other people. You need to understand what is it that really matters. What is the core value that really matters when you boil everything else away? In 1 Corinthians 12, there's this excellent passage that Paul talks about diversity in the body of Christ and the spiritual gifts and lots of different ways that we together as a church can come together to make church a great and exciting place. But it finishes here with this one line which says, "And yet I will show you the most excellent way." This is the final sentence in chapter 12. And then you go into 1 Corinthians 13. And for those of you who are familiar with your scriptures, you'll know 1 Corinthians 13 is the great chapter on love. See, Paul is saying here, it's great to have all these things in the church. And it's good. There's nothing wrong with all the diversity that comes with different spiritual gifts and different and people and all the wonderful things that go into making a great church. But don't let that be your priority. The most important thing is love. Your core value needs to be love. I want to tell you about Douglas Conant. He was the CEO of Campbell's Soup from, as you can see there, 2001 to 2011. When he took over as the president of Campbell's Soup, the company's stock was falling steeply. Of all the major food companies in the world, Campbell's was the rock bottom performer. Conant's challenge was to lead the company back to greatness, and it looked like a very daunting task. In Conant's own words, the company had a very toxic culture. Employees were disheartened, management systems were dysfunctional, trust was low, and a lot of people felt and behaved like victims. When Conant first entered the scene, employee engagement was extremely anemic. For every 2 people actively engaged, 1 person was looking for a job. This is a challenge, right? This is a broken company. Conant picked one core value, just one. He decided that he was going to be grateful for the employees that he had working for him. And he started writing handwritten notes to his staff. Now, they weren't gratuitous. It wasn't just a general, "Oh, thank you," send to everyone. He would walk around and he'd look at what people were doing individually. And he'd say, "That person's just done a good job. I'm going to write Dom a note. Dom, you've done a fantastic job. I saw what you did there. I saw how you went out of your way to help this person. I'm so proud of what you did." Handwritten note. He handwrote up to 20 notes a day to employees celebrating their successes and contributions. He says, most cultures don't do a good job of celebrating contributions, so I developed the practice of writing notes to our employees. Over the 10 years that I was CEO, it amounted to more than 30,000 notes, and we only had 20,000 employees. Wherever I go in the world, in employee cubicles, you would find my handwritten notes posted on their bulletin boards. Conan's notes were not gratuitous. They celebrated specific contributions, and because the notes were handwritten, they seemed to be treasured more than an email message might be. This was the one thing that he did differently. He did his CEO role, and he did his numbers and his spreadsheets and his reports to the board and everything else that CEOs had to do. But he chose to notice the individual and show gratitude. By 2009, the company was outperforming both the S&P Food Group and the S&P 500. Sales and earnings were on the upswing, core businesses were flourishing, and employee engagement was at world-class levels. The company now had 17 people who were enthusiastically engaged for every one who was looking for a job, compared to 2 to 1 when he started. He changed that culture with just one value: the value of gratitude. He took a core value and he said, how do I make this real in my company? How can I change this culture? And one core value changed it. I also want to tell you another story about Charles Martin, aged 67, and Larry Muggeridge Jr., aged 15. This happened in Claremont County, Ohio, back in 2006. So Charles was an older gentleman, as you can see. He was super proud of his lawn. He loved it. He spent hours keeping his lawn clean. He went out and he mowed constantly. He had the perfect edges. Does anyone here have perfect edges on your nature strip? A few people, yeah? He was just so proud of it. He loved his garden, and he just went out of his way to have the perfect manicured lawn. Larry, however, lived one side of Charles, and his school was around the corner. And Larry didn't like walking all the way around on the footpath. So Larry would cut the corner. He'd just walk over the grass, and it would be fine. It was shorter. I mean, what 15-year-old walks all the way around when you could just cut over the lovely grass? And let's face it, it was lovely grass. It was soft. It was comfortable. You know, there were no bindies in it. It was perfect grass to walk on. Well, Charles comes out and he yells at Larry, "Get off my lawn, walk around." And Larry's like, "Yeah, whatever, old man." Because, you know, he's a teenager. And so Charles goes back inside. Larry walks off to school. He comes back. He cuts across the lawn again. The next day, he cuts across the lawn again, and Charles comes out again and he goes, "Get off my lawn! Don't you understand how important this lawn is to me? Just walk around. It's not that much further. Get off! Get off!" And Larry's like, "Yeah, whatever, old man." And he carries on walking across the lawn. This goes on for day after day after day. And eventually, Charles was waiting for Larry, and when Larry walked across his lawn, Charles shot him dead. We do lie down in traffic for our core values. We do make our core values a matter of life and death. Choosing the right values can be life and death. Getting the character of our homes and our church right is the most important project that we can ever be involved in. Our children, our young people's lives, they depend on it. Our lives depend on it. Will I be a person like Doug Conant who chooses to aspire to values that lift people up and draw people close? Or will I, like Charles Martin, cling to my values that will ultimately cause other people to be lost? I started telling you about Mark, the 17-year-old who preached in that teens program where he took his jacket off. He heard about that comment and he was very upset about it. It wasn't the only thing, but there were repeated things like that in that church, repeated times where he was told that he didn't quite live up, that he wasn't living to the standard that that church accepted. Mark no longer attends church, and he says he no longer has a faith. In my view, that's life and death. Your values matter. What type of person are you going to be?